Thank you. I can see the presentation, so I'll be going ahead if it's fine for all. So yeah, so it's entitled Gender Considerations and into implementation of the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapon. Next slide. So when we talk about gender consideration into small arms and light weapon, we should consider the converging agendas of small arms and light weapon and WPS. So let's look at the normative frameworks that we are talking about. Next slide. So from the side of the WPS, we are talking about the CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, but also the Beijing Platform, and then the set of resolutions that constitute the WPS agenda. On the side of the small arms control, we speak about the Arms Trade Treaty that will be presented by my colleague in UNIDIR, and also the Program of Action on Small Arms. Next slide, please. When it comes to the WPS agenda, as I've said earlier on, there are a set of UN Security Council resolutions that do constitute the WPS agenda. And among them, I can quote the Resolution 21/2022, for instance, that made explicit remarks to women's full and meaningful participation in efforts against the illicit transfer and misuse of small arms and light weapons. So all of these resolutions resonate with the small arms initiatives and control. Next slide. It is important also to note that the WPS agenda is articulated around 4 pillars: participation, prevention, protection, but relief and recovery. And it is interesting to see that each of the pillars of the WPS also resonate with provisions of arms control. I'll take an example. When we talk about participation under WPS, we can also speak about under arms control, the effective and meaningful participation of women when it comes to specific decision-making in disarmament. Or when we talk about protection under WPS, we can also speak about the way weapons are enablers of armed violence and gender-based violence. Next slide. The second point I would like to make here in my presentation is how gender consideration are taken into account when it comes to implementation of the UN PoA and the monitoring mechanism. Next slide. In terms of the monitoring of the implementation of UN PoA, as you know, there's a review conference that are planned. The review conference actually takes place every 6 years. So the last one was in 2018. And this year, June, we are preparing for the REFCON 4. In preparation of the REFCON 4, the review conference scheduled to take place in New York, there were a preparatory committee composed mostly of member states that met in New York in February, a few days back, 12 to 16 in New York. In attendance, there were 66 states and 12 African member states of the African group, and they delivered a joint statement on issues of small arms and light weapons. And out of the 66 member states, we've noted an average 33% of women that were in attendance and took the floor, and among them 25% of African women there. The PrepCon was seen as a great opportunity actually to mainstream gender dimension into small arms and light control and to really advance women participation. There were a set of recommendations that were formulated, such as the nomination of gender advisors to these delegations to ensure the effective mainstreaming of gender consideration, but an increased number of gender trainings to be delivered to member states. How do we also increase funding for having gender responsive small arms policies and programs? And then the collection of information based on sex disaggregated data, but also reinforcing the fact that women participation is quite crucial. So these were the key recommendations made by member states in New York. Next slide. Importantly, the second stage in preparation of the review conference was to organize regional preparatory meetings in Africa. And these actually took place last week in Lomé for West and Central African member states from the 29th to the 1st March. There were 23 member states in attendance, NATCOM's POA focal points, and there were 49 delegates. And out of the 49, there were 9 women, including a high-ranking woman who's a president of the National Commission, and we'll be pleased to hear from her very shortly after my presentation. Similarly, we did the same exercise for East and Southern Africa in Nairobi, 4th to 5th March. 21 member states in attendance and approximately 40 delegates and 7 women. Key issues that were raised was really looking into the gap between the policy, the frameworks on gender considerations, small arms and light weapons, and the effective implementation of these policies, which remain a true challenge. And then the second great challenge that was identified is to how effectively empower women and ensure the effective participation to arms control initiatives and decision-making at large. Thirdly, an interesting dynamic also that was raised by member states is, yes, we need to foster women participation to small arms and light weapons and arms control initiatives, but at the same time, how to address women participation in the illicit flows of small arms and light weapons. So key recommendations was basically to share among member states our best practices, experiences, and lessons learned, but also emphasize on coordination between key national stakeholders, but also coordination between national stakeholders, state institutions, and also civil society organizations. Next slide. The third point I want to make in my presentation, and that's the last point that I want to make, is about national reporting. And then it's quite crucial because there are gender considerations to be taken into account when it comes to national reporting on POA implementation. Next slide. Just a key trend that I wanted to share with you is that to say that increasingly member states are reporting on the implementation of POA, as you can see from 2018, a slight decrease in 2022, but it still remains higher than our previous year, 2018. Next slide. So reporting, why talking about national reporting on POA right now? As you may be aware, as member states, the non-verbal were sent from the United Nations to countries that do have permanent missions to the UN, stating that the deadline is 30th April 2024 to submit national reports. And for the national focal points that need further information and having access to the password, you have here on the screen the email address to which you can send any queries. So what is important to know is that in the national reporting that we have, there is a dedicated section on gender. There is a template on how to report on gender considerations. Interestingly, in 2022, there were 94 states worldwide that reported on POA and 24 African states. Out of the 24 African states, 10 acknowledged that they do have a system established to collect data disaggregated by gender on illicit trade and small arms and light weapons. 113 did not really have this mechanism in place, and then 1 member state not responding to that. Next slide. So you have a full list that I won't go through it, but you have it on the screen of the gender section in the national reporting and the 7 entry points to which member states usually respond in terms of how well they integrate gender considerations in the implementation of the POA. One of them will be to see how member states effectively increase funding for policies and programs to implement gender issues, considerations into the POA, but also the coordination mechanism they have put in place among national institutions, but also between national authorities, civil society organizations. Last slide. So that's a graphic that really just shows the 7 entry points that I've just mentioned earlier on in the previous slide and how member states responded to that. In green, you have all the positive response on how they best integrate these several entries when it comes to gender integration. And then in red, how do they perform as well. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll give the floor to my colleague UNIDIR from UNIDIR, Hannah.
Thank you, Mariam, for your presentation. Yes, indeed, my name is Hannah Salama. I'm a gender and disarmament researcher at UNIDIR. And I wanted today to present to you a complementary framework to the UN PoA, which is the Arms Trade Treaty, another a legally binding treaty that exists, which also addresses small arms. Um, I wanted today to look at, give you an overview of how gender has been mainstreamed in the Arms Trade Treaty so far, and give you some practical ideas of how member states can further this work, so further integrate gender perspectives at a national level, but also some ideas for the upcoming Conference of State Parties, which is the 10th conference, which also marks the 10th anniversary of the treaty coming into force. So, as you know, the Arms Trade Treaty is an international treaty that regulates the conventional arms, and it seeks to prevent and eradicate illicit trade and the diversion of conventional arms. The ATT covers 8 categories of weapons, and this also includes small arms and light weapons. And what makes the ATT so relevant to our discussion today is that it's the first legally binding treaty to contain a specific provision aimed at preventing gender-based violence. So far, the treaty has 113 state parties, and 29 are in the Africa region, and an additional 11 are signatories but have not joined as state parties yet. So why is small arms and light weapons and gender-based violence relevant, or how are they connected? I wanted to here share some data that we have and sort of latest data on gender-based violence. So while we know that the majority of victims of firearm-related deaths are men, we know that women are more at risk from specific forms of armed violence. So, for example, in a study published in 2020 by the UNODC, women and girls constituted the majority, 64% of victims of intimate partner violence or family member homicides. In femicides, which is the intentional killing of a woman, small arms and light weapons are used in almost a third of cases. And this is data by the Small Arms Survey in 2018. This year, the Small Arms Survey published more recent data. And in countries like, or in continents such as the Americas, um, small arms are actually used in half of femicides. UNIDIR also published a study last year looking specifically at conflict-related sexual violence, which mainly affects women and girls. And although there is a lack of data on the connection between small arms and conflict-related sexual violence, we found that in 6 countries where this data was available, 70 to 90% of the incidents that were reported involved a firearm. So I think here we can safely say that there is a strong connection between small arms and light weapons and gender-based violence. So in light of this, this treaty requires states to assess the risk of gender-based violence when they're exporting arms or related material. So this is a measure in the ATT. It also requires states to consider implementing mitigation measures to mitigate the risk of GBV. So these are the core provisions in the ATT that address gender-based violence. Also in the 5th Conference of State Party, under the Latvian president, the theme was indeed gender and reducing gender-based violence. And in that conference, states made a lot of decisions and recommendations on different aspects of gender mainstreaming. So gender balance representation in the treaty and treaty meetings, data collection to further understand the gendered impact of armed violence, which very much mirrors recommendations from the UN PoA, and strengthening the implementation of the gender-based violence risk assessment uh, clause. So this is kind of the progress we've had, but we've also faced challenges in terms of the implementation of Article 7.4. So one of the things that we've noted is that no state party has publicly denied arms exports on the grounds that the potential weapons can be used to commit or facilitate gender-based violence. Often when we ask export licensing officer why that is. They lack specific data linking weapons or specific weapons with gender-based violence. And so for them, it's a challenge to consider whether these weapons will be used for gender-based violence. There's also a lack of understanding around risk mitigation measures related to GBV. So um, this is, for example, what can importing states do to mitigate the risk of GBV? We also have a challenge of underrepresentation in official meetings. So the ATT compromises on average only 34% of diplomats that are women. And also in technical roles, women are even more underrepresented. And so these are roles such as ammunition technical officers, explosive ordnance disposals, PSSM roles, which relate to small arms control as well. So what can we do in face of these challenges? I think that here, I will present a couple of suggestions, but I'm also very eager to hear from states and national commissions on how they can implement this or what are the challenges to implement this as well. So at a national level, I think strengthening disaggregated data collection mechanisms on gender-based violence to include the means of harm or type of weapons will be really key to operationalize Article 7.4 in the treaty as an exporting state. Ensuring inclusive participation related to um, small arms control policies, including survivors of GBV and SRSV, and people affected by armed violence, as well as their representative organizations, I think is also a really key recommendation, which has come out of our research on conflict-related sexual violence. So often, um, these survivors and victims are invisible and unknown, and but they have organizations that represent them. They are engaged in processes, and I think more and more we should be engaging them in decision making related to small arms and light weapons control at a national level. And finally, to address the challenge of women, the lack of women technical experts in this field, we can enhance their visibility by inviting them to engage meaningfully in meetings on small arms and light weapons um, during the ATT or the UN PoA. And I think this is something that states are starting to do and have begun to do already. So at the international level, one of the ways which we can enhance understanding around mitigation measures is to share national practices around mitigation measures, but also on disaggregated data collection and GBV prevention policies. In fact, Argentina has had a proposal to share these practices, and they had solicited ATT member states in a survey about GBV prevention policies and how they collect data. And so I would encourage all member states to actively engage with this. And then the ATT working group on treaty implementation has also created initiatives uh, to address weapons facilitated gender-based violence. So supporting the work of the implementation group will be really key in the next preparatory meeting and also in the next CSP. And under this year's theme, which is interagency cooperation, I think it's important to emphasize the cooperation between national agencies working on preventing GBV, women, peace and security, focal points, export control, focal points, and others in your national government or authorities that are working on gender equality. So actually, this theme is very well adapted to our discussion, and I think that an idea could be for delegations to the ATT to include also their women, peace and security experts, for example. Um, so I think I will end my presentation here. I've put a couple of questions up for consideration for our discussions later, and I think I can bring them up again. But for now, I'm really excited and keen to hear from states and civil society about to reflect on what we've just presented and to share national practices as well. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Renata Dall'Acqua, and I think she will lead us to the panel portion of this event. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Mariam, for setting the stage for our discussion today. I'm Renata Dall'Acqua. I work at UNIDIR. I'm based in Geneva, and it's a pleasure to be joining colleagues from the African group today. We organize events on gender and disarmament all over the year, but it is special to do that on International Women's Day. So allow me also to make this point and, congratulate all the women who are present here today as well. To get us started in the conversation, we will hear from Kendi Moyo. She is the first secretary for disarmament representing South Africa here in Geneva. And Kendi is very active across different areas of arms control and disarmament. And so I would like to hear from you, Kendi. What are South Africa's priorities with regards to gender and conventional arms control? What opportunity actions are you pursuing this year, and perhaps some opportunities for collaboration with other stakeholders that may be joining us today? Kendi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Renata. I appreciate being on this virtual platform, and thank you once again for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion. And I also wish to congratulate all the women that are here, wishing them a lovely International Women's Day. Today, my country is also commemorating this day under the theme Count Her In, Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. And of course, we are focusing on the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. And in line with this commemoration, I am delighted to be part of this event. Thank you very much. Now, coming to your specific questions, Renata, the question of equal representation in disarmament fora continues to experience setbacks when probed or addressed in formal or informal settings. We still have those challenges. And the gap in women's underrepresentation in mediation, negotiation, and leadership positions is rather wide compared to where it is expected to be in this present era. The UN Security Council Resolution 1325 has many goals which seek to address armed conflict, but focuses on 2 points. And that is addressing the problems that women face as victims or survivors of war, and promoting women as agents of peace. So while this is so, the same resolution is rather silent when it comes to gender issues and arms control, and does not quite address the weapons used to wage the armed conflicts. So it's quite evident that for a number of years, women have been broadly excluded in arms control and disarmament spaces. However, it is encouraging, just as in this platform, that some of the member states have not been silent, even in our meetings, but are increasingly working hard to break the silos between the WPS agenda and arms control within the multilateral system. Now, the question of gender is one of the key priorities for South Africa. And disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control is a vital area for implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. One of the important factors is that our permanent representative here in Geneva is an international gender champion under the IGC, and he decided to make disarmament a key area of focus, which then includes to promote gender equality through equal, meaningful participation and full involvement of women in disarmament diplomacy. So in fulfilling his mandate, what we did during the CSP 8 in 2022, during this event, we recalled the resolution 1325 that brought the concept of gender mainstreaming to bear on UN offices and programs dealing with disarmament and arms control issues. But it was not until the 2010 it was not so until 2010 that the General Assembly began to consider its specific implications for disarmament with the adoption of the General Resolution 65/69 on women, disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. So it was at this backdrop that we had this event that brought together decision makers, experts, researchers, to break down the gender barriers in disarmament diplomacy. And then the event, of course, addressed the challenges experienced by disarmament community in realizing the equal representation and participation of men and women in pursuing the purpose of arms control and its implementation. And we believe that the disarmament community needs to be a little bit more inclusive, and it needs to adopt more inclusive approach to international disarmament, which requires that we look at other forms of inequalities more so on the African continent. And I'm glad that we're discussing this in the context of, Africa. In relevant treaties or conventions, we also believe that we should have an integration of gender perspectives, gender diversity, and mainstreaming in statements and interventions, which is important as it adds more voice to address urgent challenges that are experienced in the disarmament forum when it comes to integration of gender perspectives. Now, in terms of GBV, South Africa sees GBV as the most important women's rights issue at our national level because we've experienced quite a number of problems. South Africa recognizes the ATT. Of course, we are a states party therein, as the first legally binding treaty to recognize the links between the arms trade and gender-based violence. And as such, we believe that the Arms Trade Treaty plays a very important and a critical role in preventing violence against women and girls. And GBV more broadly in many contexts does that. So South Africa acknowledges, the Article 7/4 in the core ATT provision dealing with GBV. And while this provision applies to GBV in conflict and non-conflict settings, most of the discussions thus far have focused more so on conflict settings. So it has been more than 23 years since the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 1325 and the subsequent resolution that we've heard as we were speaking through in many various presentations, including Resolution 2242, which was formally acknowledged in changing the nature of warfare, in which civilians are increasingly targeted and women continue to be excluded from participation in peace processes. So these resolutions, of course, address the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women. So while women, men, boys and girls can be victims of gender-based violence, women, girls, and children are the main victims due to structural inequalities and social attributes caused by the rising tensions in war and conflict-stricken countries, just as we see in our current times now. So it is worth mentioning that although GBV is only explicitly mentioned in Article 7 of the ATT, the cross-cutting nature of these acts could mean that related considerations within the ATT may also go beyond this provision and touch upon other obligations, such as those concerning prohibitions. So this may be the case for the acts of GBV that could amount to crimes against humanity and war crimes, which would trigger a prohibition on the transfer under perhaps Article 6.3 of the treaty. So South Africa also has a very strong belief that we need to develop expertise among women. Men have long dominated the security studies and technical field of arms control, and more women should be encouraged to develop professional expertise in the technical areas related to nuclear weapons and political skills involved in arms negotiations. As a result of the difference in social, economic, and educational and political opportunities, there tends to be more women experts in developed rather than developing world. And in order to improve women's expertise in the developing world, we first need to address the constraints to their involvement, which needs to be urgently identified. South Africa also recognizes the fundamental role that is played by civil society and civil society organizations in search for sustainable peace. And I know in other platforms, we appreciated the partnerships we've had with organizations such as, African Women's Leaders Network, FemWise Africa, the AU platform for women mediators, as well as some of the governments. Particularly, we've worked very well with the government of Norway on gender issues. So given the dire economic, social, and political challenges we are facing globally, South Africa remains open and ready to work with anyone who is willing to advance the cause of women, who can create a new narrative and make a meaningful difference in disarmament diplomacy today and beyond. Thank you very much, Renata. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Candy. And I really appreciate your remarks and insights and the reference to the different networks that are active in the African region. We engage with them, and we are always seeing, that they are very active in bringing together, as you said, women mediators and women experts on security issues. But for sure, there is a long way until we can have equal opportunities for men and women, and that's why such initiatives are so important right now. Our second speaker is the president of the National Commission to Combat the Proliferation of Small Arms and Light Weapons, is General Generos. I would like to check if she's here. And if she can join us. Otherwise, I don't see her right now. I think she's having some connection issues. Mariam, is she here? She's connected with the name Thomas.
Yes, they are online.
So I will change to French just to let the interpreters know. Je parlerai en français. Général Généros, est-ce que vous êtes là?
Oui, je suis ici. Je suis au bureau.
Ah, parfait. Donc, notre question pour vous aujourd'hui, c'est, selon vous, quel est le rôle des experts techniques dans l'exécution des mesures de contrôle des armes de manière à promouvoir l'égalité hommes-femmes? Avez-vous de bonnes pratiques à partager en matière de contrôle des armes et de prévention de la violence de genre?
Merci beaucoup de me poser cette question. Je commence d'abord à souhaiter la bonne fête aux dames du monde entier et surtout aux femmes qui participent dans cette réunion virtuelle. Comme vous venez de le dire, vous m'avez demandé le rôle des experts techniques dans l'exécution des mesures de contrôle des armes de manière à promouvoir l'égalité des hommes et des femmes. Pour moi, comme la commission fait partie des experts, je vois que il faut que la loi, il faut suivre de près les lois et les textes et les programmes du pays si ça tient compte de la dimension genre et la lutte contre la prolifération des ALPC. Parce qu'on voit qu'il y a des politiques genre et la politique de lutte contre la prolifération des armes légères de petit calibre qui ne sont pas mariées. Hein? Chaque politique développe les actions à part. Donc, on voit qu'il n'y a pas un lien entre les deux politiques. Ensuite, les experts doivent intégrer et faire participer les hommes et les femmes dans les activités de lutte contre la prolifération des ALPC. Il faut aussi que ces experts produisent des rapports avec des données désagrégées par sexe et par âge, ce qui peut améliorer les mesures et les stratégies à arrêter pour assurer le contrôle des armes. Ensuite, il faut responsabiliser les femmes qui sont à la hauteur d'exécuter les mesures de contrôle des armes et les obliger surtout à rendre compte. Il faut donner des rapports, il faut que ces femmes-là s'expriment et surtout, il faut les encourager. Il faut encourager les gens qui font mieux que les autres pour inciter les autres à être actifs. C'est ça, en fait, ce que je vois pour intégrer le genre. Les experts doivent veiller à ce qu'il y ait la participation. Ça ne dit pas que ça doit être équitable, égal. Les hommes et les femmes ne doivent pas nécessairement être un nombre équilibré. Mais il faut quand même insérer, donc intégrer les femmes dans les activités. Dans la deuxième question, de savoir si nous avons des bonnes pratiques à partager en matière de contrôle des armes et de la prévention de la violence armée. Ici, chez nous, dans la commission, il existe un service de coordination des opérations qui est chargé de rapporter sur les armes trouvées ou saisies ou remises. Et ce service est aussi chargé de la base des données des armes et de l'État. Et puis, il existe aussi un service qu'on appelle Observatoire de la violence armée au sein de la Commission, qui est chargé de recueillir et traiter les données sur la violence armée. C'est-à-dire, on rapporte sur les armes à feu. Et maintenant, il y a une autre donne qui parle des armes blanches. Parce qu'ici au Burundi, on voit que beaucoup de crimes sont commis avec des armes blanches. Alors là aussi, on a essayé de faire des statistiques en rapport avec les armes à feu et aussi les armes blanches. Et leurs rapports sont complémentaires, c'est-à-dire le rapport du service chargé des opérations et le rapport du service chargé de l'Observatoire de la violence armée, ces deux rapports sont complémentaires parce qu'on parle des armes, le service chargé des opérations recueille les données sur les armes et le service de l'Observatoire de la violence armée rapporte sur les incidents commis avec des armes. C'est-à-dire, si celui qui a rapporté qu'on a trouvé une arme, ça peut être l'arme qui a été utilisée pour commettre des forfaits ou bien pour commettre des incidents. Donc, vous voyez que c'est marié, donc c'est complémentaire. Et puis, il existe aussi des chefs d'antenne dans toutes les provinces et du pays qui donnent chaque jour la situation sécuritaire et dans leur circonscription en parlant des incidents commis et les armes trouvées ou saisies et retrouvées par la voie de WhatsApp. Donc, on a créé un groupe de la Sénat où chaque matin, chaque jour, on doit rapporter sur la situation qui prévaut dans chaque pays, dans chaque province. Il y a aussi un rapportage mensuel, trimestriel, semestriel et annuel sur la violence armée avec des armes à feu et aussi avec les armes blanches. On parle du nombre d'incidents rapportés et ceux qui les ont rapportés. Ici, nous avons des partenaires comme la police, l'administration, la société civile, les chefs d'antenne, les services sanitaires, les comités mixtes de sécurité et les médias. Les rapports sont donnés à la primature, c'est-à-dire que le rapport de l'Observatoire de la violence armée est transmis à la primature. Et il y a aussi des copies d'autres, les autres rapports, on les distribue dans les ministères clés qui sont partenaires et aussi à la police et au gouverneur pour que chaque gouverneur sache la situation sécuritaire qui prévaut dans sa province. Et puis, nous faisons la sensibilisation des hauts cadres et des provinces et communes à partir de ces statistiques. Il y a aussi la sensibilisation des comités mixtes de sécurité. Les comités mixtes de sécurité, ce sont des comités qui se trouvent sur les collines et qui sont chargés de surveiller de près la situation sécuritaire. Donc, et ces comités doivent rapporter ce qu'ils ont vu et même ce sont eux qui doivent intervenir ou bien assister des personnes en danger. Nous faisons aussi des ateliers d'identification des causes et des solutions des violences armées. On organise des ateliers et on invite des gens clés, surtout les femmes, pour voir ensemble ce qu'il faut faire, identifier les auteurs, identifier les causes et trouver aussi les solutions. Et puis encore, on se rend compte de la situation des auteurs et leurs dossiers dans la justice. Il ne suffit pas qu'on arrête l'auteur et qu'on l'incarcère dans les lieux de détention et c'est fini. Il faut suivre de près l'évolution de leur dossier. Savoir si l'auteur qui a été interpellé, qui a été arrêté, et son dossier suit la voie normale, soit la juridiction normalement, et voir comment aussi on a pu trancher. Et puis, nous rendons aussi visite et assister des victimes, c'est-à-dire les orphelins et les survivants de la violence armée. Comme ça, on voit qu'on incite la population à écouter, à participer dans la lutte de la violence armée parce qu'on voit que les victimes ou bien les survivants, ce n'est pas la charge du gouvernement seulement, mais on leur montre que ça devient une charge pour toute la population. Parce que les orphelins, si c'est leur parent qui a commis l'incident, qui a tué leur maman, l'homme est incarcéré et les enfants restent dans la maison. Dans ce cas, il faut chercher des familles qui peuvent éduquer ces enfants, qui peuvent les assister. Donc, les familles doivent récupérer ces enfants et ayant aussi les charges propres. Donc, ces enfants-là deviennent des charges supplémentaires. Donc, c'est comme ça qu'il faut leur montrer que la lutte contre la prolifération des ALPC, ça engage tout le monde, que ce soit les hommes, que ce soit les femmes, que ce soit les jeunes, c'est tout le monde. Et puis, Nous donnons des orientations pour réduire la prolifération des armes et la violence armée en utilisant, que ce soit l'utilisation des armes blanches pour combattre les désincitats, tout en nous référant sur les rapports et les informations données par les partenaires de la CENAC. Et puis, ces pratiques nous permettent d'informer et d'alerter l'autorité et l'administration, la police et la population afin qu'ils soient au courant de ce qui se passe dans le pays, afin que chacun réagisse à temps en ce qui le concerne. C'est ça ce que nous faisons ici à la CENAC. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Now I'll speak in English again. Just to say thank you very much, General Generose, for outlining the crucial role that national commissions play in the prevention of armed violence, also in the prevention of gender-based violence, but also outlining the issues such as sensitization of the population and women's empowerment in this area as well. We really appreciate it. I see we have a raised hand. I would kindly ask the colleague to wait a little bit because we have a third presentation, a third and final presentation, and then we will open for discussions. But please feel free to raise your hands or also put questions in the chat. Now I would like to address the third speaker, Mr. Singo Mwashofi, who is the Deputy Director of Security Research and Information Center in Kenya. Is he still here? Is Singo here?
Yes, I am here, yes.
Okay, great. Singo, so you are based in Nairobi and you were at the center of the action this week, where there was a meeting on the UN PoA. But beyond that, you also follow, arms control and security issues very closely. So we would like to hear from you, reflecting, on all we've heard today on gender responsive arms control with a focus in the Africa region. What would you say were the successes that have been achieved and what's still left to be done, Singo?
Thank you very much, Madam Renata. And may I add my voice in wishing every lady here and across the world a happy International Women's Day. I would like to project my screen, if you will allow me to do that.
Okay, now it seems we lost Singo. No, you're here, Singo, but you're mute.
Okay, I think it could have gone.
Can you try again sharing your screen?
Let me try again.
Yes, it says here started sharing your screen and we see it, although not in presentation mode.
Okay, let me put it on presentation mode. You can see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very well. Let me respond to your two questions, but I want to also contextualize as I do that, as I respond to the questions. I think that in terms of the prevalence of small arms and light weapons in our region, the statistics show about 7 million illicit small arms and light weapons in circulation in our region. That is the Great Lakes and Horn of Africa region. And among the factors responsible for this are many, some of which are about ungoverned spaces with weak states and a weak state security presence. national stockpiles of failed countries like, in our region, Libya and Sudan and South Sudan and Somalia and others. Cross-border flows from conflict-torn and fragile countries, and of course the global and regional illicit arms trade, among other factors. These are the ones responsible for the proliferation of the problem of arms in our continent. And in terms of justifying why are we having a conversation about gender in arms control, if I may just want to remind us, is because, especially from the context of our region in Africa, traditional gender norms are patriarchal, especially in most conflict-affected countries in our continent. And this influences concepts of manliness and masculinity and manhood. And the voices and the role and representation of women in arms control initiatives is marginal. Men dominate those spaces. And that the traditional gender norms create gender inequality, which reinforces patriarchy and exclusion of women. Now, exclusion of women in small arms control spaces has cascaded into policy frameworks globally and in our region here, as well as in individual countries. And the statistics show that women and children form 81% of our regions, for example, refugees, and that small arms and light weapons related violence aggravates other forms of violence, including child and early marriages, forced marriages, survival problems, and issues of these very well interrelated other effects that the women suffer. That 3% of all the small arms and light weapons related deaths are women globally, and that Africa is the most unsafe region for women globally, especially in the context of small arms and light weapons. So gender, power dynamics, and gender violence, etc., women are victims. And so it's important that we are having this conversation here today. In terms of the gender mainstreaming at the global level, I think colleagues have spoken about it. I may not want to spend a lot of time on this. I think we have 3 major frameworks, the UN PoA, which someone has spoke about in details, especially Pillar 3. Then we have Women, Peace and Security, especially the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 of 2000. We have, of course, also the ATT, Article 7 and 4, and we have the UN PoA that speak to the problem of arms and that have specific gender provisions in them. Regionally here, we have also a heavy presence of legal policy frameworks as well as institutional references. We have the Windhoek Declaration and the Namibia Plan of Action of 2000. We have the Nairobi Declaration of 2005 that engendered effects of small arms and light weapons. We have the Bamako Declaration of 2000. We have the REXA regional gender policy developed between 2009 and 2014 that have specific references to provisions on gender. And we have, of course, national focal points that have been established significantly through provisions of the UN PoA and that are found across member states in the region and that are charged with the implementing those specific provisions. We should also make reference to the AU silencing the guns policy, also the Agenda 2030, 2060, and of course, regional economic communities and regional mechanisms for peace and security, such as ICGLR, that have specific provisions for gender and small arms interventions. In terms of the progress of implementation, if I may just say something about this, we have in 2022, that is, if you focus on ATT and UN PoA, and if I repeat something that has been said by other colleagues, you will forgive me. So in 2022, 56 states reported efforts to mainstreaming gender, and 30% of the countries reported having collected disaggregated data on gender dimensions of small arms and light weapons, especially within the UN PoA framework. Only 3 African countries collected gender disaggregated data, that is Tanzania, Swaziland, and Nigeria. under capacity building, knowledge development, and prioritization of gender mainstreaming among national focal points, such as RECSA, including regular reporting on UN PoA implementation by countries in the region. At least those of us who have been in New York, every time we have this at the BMSs or review conferences, you have had states report on this. In terms of the women, peace and security, 81 UN member states and regions have developed national action plans, including Africa and within the IGAD region. 56%, that is 30 countries, and 6 regional economic communities, that is IGAD, ECOWAS, SADC, the Mano River region, ECAS, in Africa have developed national action plans and regional action plans respectively, while 8 African countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Mali, Niger, Sudan, South Sudan, Senegal, have considered gender in their national action plans and in their small arms and light weapons control initiatives. In terms of the success stories, now coming to your specific questions, I want to highlight the following. From the point of view of representation, RECSA countries, especially Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, have adopted a 2/3 gender rule in governance. And this is significant because it relates to specific gender issues around decision-making, around representation of women in decision-making, which is the subject of the international and regional frameworks that we have just spoken to. Secondly, RECSA countries, particularly Ethiopia, Central African Republic, Kenya, Tanzania, and South Sudan, have increased the number of women in security sector, including women in influential positions as defense ministers. In Kenya here, in the recent past, we have had a defense minister who is a woman, and I think this is significant because for far too often, women have not been in positions that are of significance in terms of governance. In terms of participation, Uganda and Kenya, women in these countries, and especially in the Karamoja Triangle, which straddles Kenya, northern Kenya, northern Uganda, and southern Ethiopia, and southern South Sudan, have had women participating in DDR and other related small arms and light weapons control initiatives. I think Uganda is significant because of the programs that the country has developed and implemented in its northern parts that have had problems of small arms and light weapons and have included gender issues and women issues in that implementation. Burundi and Sierra Leone have been involved in DDR programs and in small arms control initiatives that have involved women, and that is important. Then in terms of rights, protection, and relief and recovery as a success story, most African countries, most countries in the region, in our region, in the RECSA region in particular, have adopted international legal frameworks on the rights of women, including against sexual violence. And Kenya has an elaborate Sexual Crimes Act, and I think that is important to highlight because it has come into bear, especially when you are dealing with the transgressions around women and around gender issues. Then ceasefire and peace agreements are increasingly incorporating women-specific issues, including sexual violence in conflict and medical treatment, psychotherapy for women affected by conflict. For instance, the South Sudan and the Ethiopia's recent peace agreements have specific provisions for this, and this is important. Then I think we also need to mention about the integration and the implementation of specific gender governance policies in countries like Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania that have made tremendous progress in involving women in leadership and in specific programming, for example, on gender-based violence. For example, here in our country, we have a law that criminalizes FGM and other related activities that injure women well-being and women rights. So what needs to be done? As I wind up, I think I want to highlight the following. And somebody mentioned it, converging agendas, for example. We need to see convergence between local and global initiatives on small arms and light weapons, as well as on gender mainstreaming. The Women, Peace and Security agenda and small arms and control actors need to collaborate more in developing the national action plans and the programs and the implementation of the same. Secondly, support for regional states to review legal, policy, and institutional frameworks on small arms and light weapons control to ensure gender mainstreaming. I think review national and regional small arms and light weapons NAPs to include gender mainstreaming. That has been, I have to say, much more in terms of words than in terms of actions. Because a lot of the time where the national action plans have been developed, you don't see much in terms of implementation. I think we want to call for implementation. Then, of course, reviewing those NAPs, and including small arms, control-specific and gender-specific issues and initiatives, advocating for increase of the number of women in small arms initiatives. This has been said before, platforms and decision-making bodies, including focal points from the regional context, the REXA, etc., to specific national focal point, as it may be. Then, in terms of the ascension to international instruments on small arms and light weapon control, the previous speaker has spoken about the ATT. I have been involved, and many of you in this room have been involved in the efforts to ensure, to follow up and ensure the implementation of the ATT. And we always get embarrassed, some of us from East Africa, when we are in Geneva and the conversations are being held about the ATT, and there is no one from the region in the room. Why? Because many of the states have neither signed nor acceded to the treaty. Only 3 states, Tanzania, Burundi, and Rwanda, have signed the treaty but have not become members. And I think you cannot champion a treaty that you are not a member of. I think one of the biggest indicators is for you to become a member of the treaty, to accede to it, and to implement it. So I think a lot of work needs to be done to ensure, in terms of universalization, that our member states are speaking together with. I am winding up, please. So then, secondly, we need to push. We need to ensure implementation of the provisions of the UN PoA, including those adhering to provisions on gender dimensions of the treaty. There is still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of implementation. And as I wind up, then also development partners need to support initiatives which create awareness and build technical capacity. I think the previous speaker from Burundi has said this, building the capacity of women in small arms and light weapons control. And that focus on security promotion and violence reduction in all forms is critical if we are to ensure that the agenda of mainstreaming women and gender issues in small arms control initiatives is achieved. We also need to promote local ownership of small arms and light weapons control and the women peace agenda provisions, because as long as we don't have local control and local ownership, then the agenda ceases to be very meaningful to us. Then again, finally, full implementation of the key instruments, the political one, the UN PoA, and the legal one, the ATT, including also the WPS and other regional instruments that relate to gender and small arms and light weapons control. Chair, I beg to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Singo. I thought your presentation was super interesting. I even took a screenshot of the success stories. It's always good to know about those. Uganda, Kenya, Burundi, Sierra Leone. It's very good to raise awareness and educate ourselves, learn more about what's happening. And I also took note of your ideas for action, very concrete and very relevant for the different instruments, as you said, the UN PoA, the ATT, and the WPS agenda. I would like now move to our Q&A segment. I would like to note we'll be staying on this call for another 10, 15 minutes until 45 past the hour. So if that's okay with you. We will have the opportunity to hear now. There are 2 people that I know want to take the floor. It's the first one will be Mr. Lasconi, who is the UN focal point. Who is the UN focal point for it's the PoA focal point from Cameroon. And so I would like to ask Mr. Lasconi to give the floor to him, but also whoever is on the call that would like to turn their cameras on, maybe we can also take a screenshot of all participants. So while Mr. Lasconi Oh, okay. Lots of people turning their cameras on. So let's do this first, our group photo. Oh, it's so much better now. Great to see you all. Let's see. So Mariam, our group photo is a screenshot. And let's see. Are we ready? So let's go. Okay. Thank you so much. We'll be posting this online, so please have a look at the UNIDIR and UNREC social media account. If I could now give the floor to the colleague that has requested, Mr. Lasconi, are you here with us?
Oh, yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Hope
Hello.
you're getting me. Hello, good morning, Renata.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Oh, just want to join my voice with one of the colleagues to wish to all women a wonderful Monday. And I will continue in French. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici ce jour pour cette importante réunion. Je ne voudrais pas revenir sur ce qui a été dit par les collègues. Are you getting me? Okay, thank you. Ok, je ne voudrais pas revenir sur ce qui a été déjà dit par les collègues pour ne pas être redondant. En ce qui concerne toutes les activités menées aussi bien au plan régional que sur régional, parce que les réalités qui sont pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest, l'Afrique de l'Est sont les mêmes pour l'Afrique centrale et notamment pour le Cameroun. Je voudrais juste rapidement un peu partager l'expérience du Cameroun en ce qui concerne les efforts mis en œuvre pour la lutte contre la prolifération des armes de petit calibre, notamment en ce qui concerne son aspect femmes, paix et sécurité. Je voudrais beaucoup plus me focaliser sur un projet que nous avons mis en œuvre avec ONU Femmes, et avec ONU Femmes, UNIDIR et UNREC. Le projet porte sur Saving Life Entity dénommé Salient. Le projet Salient au Cameroun, dans sa phase pilote, s'inscrit dans le cadre du prolongement du Peace Building Fund et avait pour objectif de contribuer à la paix, à la sécurité, à l'égalité des sexes et au développement durable au niveau national, en améliorant l'efficacité du contrôle des armes légères par la promotion d'un cadre sensible au genre et en promouvant la participation équitable significative des femmes à toutes les sphères de décision de contrôle d'armes. Le projet, on peut dire qu'il était essentiellement orienté vers les femmes et aussi les jeunes qui sont des principales victimes de la violence armée. Donc, les activités qu'on a menées sur le terrain visaient à sauver des vies en s'attaquant aux causes profondes de la violence armée et à leurs conséquences sur le développement et l'autonomisation des femmes, notamment celles vivant dans les communautés confrontées aux crises sécuritaires. Rapidement, en termes d'objectifs, les activités menées sur le terrain visaient à faire face aux défis multidimensionnels liés à la violence armée, au commerce illicite des ALPC et à l'impact négatif sur le développement, à améliorer les mécanismes de contrôle sur les armes, à sensibiliser les populations et les communautés cibles, sur les mécanismes de contrôle sur les armes, à contribuer à la mise sur pied des mécanismes devant assurer la participation significative des femmes dans l'élaboration des politiques publiques sur le contrôle des armes légères et de petit calibre et créer une plateforme nationale avec des relais communautaires, former des formateurs sur la nature multiforme des LPC et leurs liens avec le développement. Donc, le projet a été réalisé au Cameroun de 2022 à 2023 et il a permis de renforcer les capacités des femmes et des jeunes contre les violences armées et la prolifération des LPC. En termes d'objectifs, c'est plus de 500 professionnels, on peut dire des médias, des leaders communautaires, des représentants des organisations de la société civile et des organisations de protection et de promotion des droits des femmes qui ont été formés ou pour être formés, pour former les formateurs et des relais au sein des communautés. Donc, les activités organisées sur le plan national ont pour but de soutenir les politiques, les programmes et les actions intégrant la dimension genre en lien avec le développement dans la lutte contre le trafic et le détournement des armes légères de petit calibre, notamment les agendas 13-25, auxquels on a ajouté l'agenda 22-50. Au final, on peut dire nous avons essayé de mettre sur pied une plateforme avec pour objectif d'assurer le suivi des actions sur le terrain, des relais communautaires, des formateurs, etc. Donc, là, également en termes de perspective, le projet Seven Life Entity, CELIENT, a permis d'accélérer la mise sur pied des mécanismes devant assurer la participation significative des femmes dans l'élaboration des politiques publiques sur le contrôle des armes légères et en lien avec le développement à travers des actions de sensibilisation, la prévention, la protection et l'assistance. Il a également permis de contribuer à un éveil de conscience sur les dangers des LPC illicites et son impact négatif sur l'autonomisation des femmes et des jeunes et sur leurs perspectives de développement. Dans sa phase opérationnelle, le projet s'est appesanti sur l'impératif de la confiance entre les populations et les autorités, la mise en œuvre des programmes communautaires de prévention, de sensibilisation, des leaders communautaires, des médias et des organismes de la société civile. En définitive, ce projet aura suscité de grands espoirs et s'est avéré être le réceptacle. Et là, je me retourne vers l'UNIDIR, vers l'UNODA et vers l'UNREC pour dire que ce projet s'est avéré être le réceptacle de plusieurs autres initiatives à venir. Et actuellement, au niveau national, il fait l'objet d'une profonde réflexion pour son appropriation nationale. Et dans le cadre de ce projet, nous sommes actuellement en train de poursuivre les concertations sur la création d'un organe national de contrôle et de gestion des LPC, l'élaboration d'un plan national jeunesse, paix et sécurité, sur la mise en œuvre de la résolution 2250, l'opérationnalisation de la résolution 1325, dont le deuxième plan d'action a été adopté au Cameroun en fin 2022. Voilà un peu de manière rapide ce que je souhaitais juste partager l'expérience du Cameroun pour voir quels sont les efforts que nous essayons de mettre pour permettre aux femmes de participer de manière significative à la lutte contre les LPC en mettant un focus sur les projets opérationnels. Nous n'avons pas voulu revenir sur les autres qui ont déjà été dits par les précédents collègues, mais voir un peu sur le plan national comment est-ce que cela aura contribué à améliorer la lutte contre la prolifération des LPC, parce que nous savons qu'il y a un lien direct entre la violence armée et le développement ou l'autonomisation de la femme. Donc, nous pensons que les deux sont liés et c'est le moment pour nous d'exprimer notre gratitude au Bureau des Nations Unies pour le désarmement, à l'UNREC, qui nous ont pratiquement accompagnés, au PNUD, qui nous ont accompagnés dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre de ce projet. Je crois que je vais m'arrêter là pour des contraintes de temps, pour que notre réunion ne soit pas très longue. Je sais qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres orateurs qui souhaitent prendre la parole et nous sommes ouverts pour toute information complémentaire. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lasconi. I would like to note that we have 4 other people who would like to take the floor. I'll give the floor to them, but because of the time constraints and also in respect to our speakers, I think it's great if you guys can be a bit short, more concise in these interventions. So I'll give the floor in the order that I see on my screen. The first person is Fatoumata Maiga.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice. Moi, je suis Fatoumata Maïga du Mali. Je suis ravie de voir sur l'écran Madame le lieutenant-colonel Hawa Dambélé du secrétariat permanent. Certainement que les questions institutionnelles, je ne vais pas les toucher de manière très profonde. Je voudrais juste dire toute ma joie de partager avec vous ces questions portant sur le genre et la violence sexiste. Il est très important qu'on on parle du genre dans toute sa dimension parce que vous savez que nos pays du Sahel, nous sommes confrontés à des choses. Il y a la violence sexiste, mais nous avons aussi le terrorisme qui prend une dimension en genre en termes de victimes aussi bien que d'acteurs. Parce que nous avons la question de l'enrôlement des enfants, parce que nous les appelons enfants dans la mesure où ces enfants sont âgés entre 8 et 18 ans, qui participent directement au terrorisme, armes à la main, et qui sont victimes et qui aussi tuent d'autres personnes. Il y a la question des femmes qui sont directement touchées, soit dans leur vie ou soit dans leur vie sociale. Ça veut dire que elles sont obligées à être des déplacés éternels parce que c'est des déplacés forcés par les armes, on les fait sur leur tiroir, donc ils sont exposés à beaucoup de vulnérabilité. Il y a les vieilles personnes, il y a tout cela auquel nous devons penser. Il y a le général de Burundi qui a parlé aussi de la question des violences sexuelles. Malheureusement, au Mali, nous avons ce problème. J'aurais souhaité qu'on en parle avec Awa parce que nous avons notre ministère chargé de la femme qui travaille là-dessus. Je participe à certaines campagnes. Il faut nous aider à faire la base de données de toutes ces violences liées à la femme au niveau de la famille. Ce qui est pour moi est très important et ça nous permet de comprendre exactement ce qu'il faut faire. Nous avons un texte juridique, c'est-à-dire une loi nationale portant sur la problématique des armes, qui régit le port des armes au Mali. Malheureusement, la question du genre n'est pas prise en compte là-dedans. Je pense que nous avons partagé cela pendant un bon bout de temps et la campagne que nous avons eu à faire de l'adoption de cette loi à nos jours, c'est de voir comment est-ce qu'il faut avoir un texte additif qui complète cette loi-là. Nous avons déjà écrit une ou deux fois, nous avons rencontré le président de la commission défense et sécurité de l'organe qui remplace le Parlement et nous espérons que les jours à venir, puisque nous travaillons directement avec le secrétariat permanent, nous allons avoir des séances de travail avec les structures concernées pour pouvoir faire face à cela. Vous avez parfaitement raison, la question de la représentativité des femmes dans le contrôle des armes au niveau institutionnel est très bas. Il faut travailler en cela. Et je parle sous le contrôle du colonel Hawa, c'est que le Mali va aller à sa deuxième génération de plan. Il est important que le secrétariat permanent et les acteurs soient accompagnés pour qu'on puisse avoir un texte consensuel qui vraiment s'adapte au contexte dans lequel nous nous trouvons aujourd'hui. Voilà un peu ce que je voudrais dire, mais surtout la maîtrise des textes. Vous avez parlé de la déclaration de Bamako. C'est fait ici à Bamako. J'ai eu la chance de participer à cela très jeune. Mais est-ce que je n'ai pas vieilli? Est-ce que tout le monde est au courant de ces textes-là? Est-ce que tout le monde connaît le plan d'action des Nations Unies? Est-ce que tout le monde... Il va falloir que nous travaillions en cela. Et ce qui est vraiment un peu contraignant pour nous du Mali, c'est qu'il y a beaucoup de pays en conflit instable qui nous entourent aussi, mais aussi l'incapacité des Nations Unies à aller vers sa campagne à faire taire les armes parce que l'Union africaine n'a pas un texte régional pour faire face à cela. Voilà un peu ce que je voudrais rapidement dire parce que la question elle est très importante pour nous. nous n'avons pas suffisamment de temps. Je suis obligée de m'arrêter là, mais je voudrais juste remercier au passage Yansa et UNREC parce qu'ils avaient déjà passé au Mali pour nous écouter sur ces questions-là et l'impact des armes sur la question de la femme. Et vous dire clairement que c'est un sérieux problème de société chez nous, mais ça touche carrément le droit à la vie et au bien-être du genre et de la femme. Voilà un peu ramasser ce que je voulais dire par rapport à...
Merci. Merci beaucoup pour partager votre expérience du Mali. The next person I see in my screen is Ali Kamara. You are on mute. We cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Voilà, merci Madame la modératrice. Bon, je suis, au lieu d'Ali Kamara, c'est Bambo Fofana, général président de la Commission nationale de la République de Guinée. Je voudrais saisir cette opportunité pour d'abord féliciter les organisations de cette réunion dont le thème est d'actualité. Il n'y a pas besoin de faire beaucoup de commentaires par rapport à ça. Et aussi féliciter les personnes qui ont contribué à renforcer nos capacités à travers les informations partagées dans les différentes communications. Et je saisis aussi l'opportunité pour souhaiter la bonne fête à toutes les femmes du monde. En ce qui concerne le thème de cette réunion, il faut rappeler qu'au niveau de la République de Guinée, depuis l'indépendance, il existe une longue tradition de promotion des femmes au niveau des différentes institutions du pays. Les questions de genre font partie des préoccupations de toutes les autorités et à tous les niveaux en ce qui concerne la promotion et la lutte contre les violences basées sur le genre. Et dans ce cadre, je crois que le texte législatif et réglementaire privilégie l'égalité de chances aux hommes et aux femmes pour l'accès aux différents postes, quel que soit le niveau du poste. Et pour revenir exactement dans le cadre de l'organisation que nous dirigeons, je peux parler de la Commission nationale de lutte contre la prolifération et la circulation illicite des armes légères en République de Guinée. Et pour participer à la promotion de ce genre, dans la composition, il existe au sein de notre organisation 3 organisations non gouvernementales qui sont composées de femmes. Donc ça, c'est pour permettre aux femmes de participer pleinement à la lutte contre les armes légères au niveau de notre pays. Et aussi, faut-il rappeler qu'au niveau de la mise en œuvre des différentes activités que nous menons sur le terrain, des sensibilisations ont été menées sur les violences basées sur le genre. Et ça fait partie des éléments qui sont toujours mis en exergue dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre des projets et activités mises en œuvre au niveau de la Commission nationale. Je voudrais terminer mon propos par exprimer le fait que la Commission nationale de la République de Guinée s'associe pleinement au combat des femmes pour la promotion et leur implication dans la lutte pour le contrôle des armes. Et elle s'engage à prendre en compte cette problématique liée au genre dans la mise en œuvre. Elle le fait déjà, parce que la prise en compte de la problématique genre pour le recrutement des consultants lors de la mise en œuvre des activités est un élément qui est mis en exergue au niveau de la Commission nationale de la République de Guinée. Bon, comme le temps est déjà limité, je profite pour remercier encore davantage les organisateurs et exprimer toute la disponibilité de la Commission nationale à mener le combat, parce que c'est un combat de tous les jours, c'est un combat permanent. Du fait que la population guinéenne est composée de 53% de femmes. Donc, promouvoir cette force vive fait partie des préoccupations qui sont partagées à tous les niveaux. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Now I would like to give the chance to the other people that have their hands raised to speak, but we're really very much short on time. So if you could just be brief, and we will need to close this meeting very soon. I see Vivian Dogby from Liberia.
So thank you, Renata. I will be very brief. Happy International Women's Day to all the lovely women in there, and I say thank you for inviting me to this event. Thanks to the presenter also. I'm from the Liberia Arms Commission. I just want to quickly share some of our sources in linking gender mainstreaming to arms control, the relevance. So key word is coordination with relevant actors. So I know in Liberia, we have an institution that is responsible for gender. So we have, at the commission, we have to work with that institution to be able to get the relevant data. So once we are reporting on the POA, we have to ensure that we have the data to be able to de-aggregate the data on gender. We noticed that we have a national gender action plan, but the plan does not expressly the linkage between arms control and gender GBV incidences. So we are working with the relevant institution to ensure that we capture that. In that way, we will have a holistic and practical action to be able to tackle gender issues nationally. So I think these are some of the things we need to do. Bring together more institutions, collaborate, and then we have practical steps to ensure that we look at gender and encourage gender mainstreaming at all levels. Thank you.
Great to hear from you, Vivian. And I would just like to thank everyone that joined, and also apologize that not everyone has had the opportunity to speak. But I really appreciated this level of engagement and hearing the different experiences from across the African region. I think there is a lot to be done in terms of showcasing the best practices and also discussing ways forward together. I would like to thank the speakers that joined us and say that today's meeting was recorded and it will be available on UNIDIR's website. We will be sending a feedback form. You can check in the chat box. There's a feedback form, and you can write there your feedback, your honest feedback. I already saw here on the chat that we should have had more time, and I think that's true. And so this is something that me and my colleagues at UNIDIR and UNREC will take notice and organize meetings with more time. And please feel free to reach out and invite us to be a part of the initiatives that you are doing either at national level or regional level. We very much welcome the opportunity to engage. With that, I would like to close today's meeting and say thank you very much and wish a wonderful International Women's Day to everyone. Goodbye.